Hey, it's the Geek Biz here again, and this time we're really in for it. I spoke at some length last time, at some length being the operative words, about comments I had received about getting to the point. Many further comments arrived on last time's post. One of them was somebody named Kippy said, they are stories, and stories need to meander. Getting to the point misses the point. This actually captures what I think. The beauty of a platform like TikTok is you don't have to please everybody, and everybody doesn't have to please you. Among the things that can happen is you scroll by if you don't like it, and you stick around for what you do like. And as a result, people end up coming to participate in the things that mean something to them. So rather than building an audience, you take the 8 billion people who are out there, let's say, and those that like you find you. And there don't need to be that many of them. Even the tiniest fraction ends up being a whole lot of actual people, which brings me to my point in a different way. I think I said last time that I woke up thinking about logic and an old logic course that I took once in college. Well, I woke up today as even worse. I was thinking about calculus. Calculus is one of those things, I'm telling you, it's just a staggering revelation, or it was to me. I didn't take it in high school. I managed to avoid it somehow. I was avoiding math, I think, because you needed to actually do some work, which I wanted to also avoid. But one day I decided that my interests would be better served professionally anyway if I went to medical school and broadened my horizons that way rather than being a banjo player, which if I had been better at it, I probably would have done that. But I thought I would play to my strengths, is what it comes down to. So I was, as I may have mentioned, I was a philosophy major in college. I had dropped out to play banjo for a while, and then I decided, okay, I'm going to go to medical school. I had to add some courses to my philosophy major that I might not have taken otherwise, and I had stopped math, like after geometry. I needed to re-remember how to even do arithmetic before I started in calculus. I'm telling you, on about day 3, I thought, where has this been all my life? This is how you do things. I thought, I've always wondered, how do you do a thing like that? And I realized, well, calculus is it. That's how you do it. So I became instantly enamored of it and I loved it. I loved it. I loved it more than any of the other science courses that I took. I've ended up after that class carrying with me the idea of a derivative versus an integral for the rest of my life. And the way I'm going to talk about it now is simplistic. But the derivative is measuring the rate of change. How quickly and in what way is the car changing speed? Which another way to say that is the acceleration of the car is the derivative. That's what you're plotting. How fast is the position of the car plotted against time? How quickly is that number changing? That's the derivative. The integral is what's the area under the curve. So I was thinking of this in terms of pandemics. For example, we tend to say, how many people actually died in a given pandemic? Is it that high a number? How lethal was this thing? Not saying any particular pandemic for these purposes, but in general, how lethal is this thing? People tend to look at that number, and I call that the integral, the number of total people who died during a pandemic. And I say to folks sometimes to think about this, that's not really what you're interested in. You want to look at the derivative and not the integral, because it's how fast was this illness spreading is what you really want to know. That tells you how contagious it is, what the likelihood is that it's going to overwhelm the healthcare system and that it's going to get out of control in its killing people more than the total number of people who've died. Both things are important, but looking at the derivative gives you more relevant information than looking at the integral. What does this have to do with anything, you might ask? you can divide stances one might take towards a discipline into something analogous to the derivative versus the integral in philosophy and education and ethics and psychology and in almost all ways. You can look at things this way. It's, I suppose you could say you're interested in what ways and how fast are things changing rather than what has accumulated. That would be another way of expressing this. In education, for example, you could say the derivative is how fast you're learning and how you're adapting and growing through learning versus the hard knowledge that you're accumulating, which would be the integral in that analogy. And it may well be that the student who is learning faster and using their learning to adapt and grow surpasses in many ways the student who is simply accumulating knowledge. Again, you don't say that there's one to the exclusion of another. This is just a way of expressing two dimensions of various dynamic processes. This is probably similar in forms of thinking about the human mind. The contents of the mind might be viewed as the integral, and the process of how the mind works, how it's functioning, could be viewed as the derivative. How the mind moves, how associations form and linkages and such. The reason this is important here has to do with stories and getting to the point. Sometimes when you're trying to teach somebody, you get the question, hey, doc, which of these things that you're talking about are going to be on the exam? Which I always take to be, how can I listen to as little of what you're saying as possible and still pass the exam? Which I respect. I know that I've been there myself on that end of the learning curve as I'm sitting there in a classroom. So I'm not being critical of people with that perspective, especially people with that perspective about some things, which might include the things that I'm talking about. Nonetheless, that's one aspect of learning, is the actual accumulation of knowledge that's going to be on the exam. But what I'm most interested in people is how their minds work. That's what I want to do. I want to learn how somebody thinks. I've had more opportunities than some, I think, to spend a little bit of time in the company of various geniuses. And I'm completely fascinated by how they think. It's a mystery to me, really, how they arrive at what they arrive at. And this is particularly true in creativity. I guess all genius is a matter of creativity, whether it's scientific creativity or artistic creativity or something else. It's not entirely clear. In fact, it's not at all clear to me how creativity is actually possible. I'm tempted to say, well, people can skip steps because of their level of endowment. And so it appears to be more magical than it really is. But I'm not so sure about that. It appears so magical sometimes that I just can't look at it as it really in any other way as coming from someplace that I don't understand or don't have access to, or I don't know what. But it's an amazing thing and something to see. But for the rest of us, we lesser thinkers, I still find it fascinating to try to understand how somebody's thinking, how their mind works, and where it goes under what circumstances. Because I think if I'm learning something about that, I'm getting some enduring knowledge, know-how from the person. I'm watching them do what they do best and trying to learn about it. It's not that hard to lay down the facts and the contents of what they're saying. That's usually the easier thing. But how they're thinking about it and where their mind's going, that to me, that's what learning really is. And that's certainly what I'm interested in. And that's what I'm hoping people will, some people, right? I don't ask that we know that I don't ask that people particularly care for my way of doing things. I just hope that those that do will appreciate what I'm doing, and those that don't will scroll on or stay here to hate on me. You can do that too. But either way, what I'm looking for is people who are interested in not just the contents of what I'm saying, but how I'm trying to think about it. And I guess the calculus is part of it. Here we're looking at the derivative and not the integral, and there's much to be gained from that, I think, as a general way of trying to understand people. I guess you could say understanding probably develops out of participation in a process and not just the static accumulation of the products of that process. I mean, if you really wanted to take it into the abstract, maybe you would say that the integral is what has already been learned. That's what's been accumulated. The derivative is the process and how the thinking is taking place, how the learning and the growth and, if you will, the becoming is taking place. That's where the money is. And that's what we're listening for and looking for. You know, watch the rate and not the record would be another way of putting it. So if you want another take on this from the Geek Biz, it's not about where you've been and where you are as much as it is about where you're moving and how fast you're going. I'm reminded of the quotation from the great Wayne Gretzky, a hockey player, for those not old or not into hockey. He says, you've got to skate where the puck is going, not where it's been. And that's another way of putting it. But that's a take home from the Geek Biz, and I am going to keep it brief today.